there were many really successful people I met in my entrepreneurial life that got really good at one or two things, generalized that to think they were good at everything, right? Do you know this phenomenon?
Yeah. I think it also happens in marriage, by the way.
Of course it does, bidirectionally, right? Uh, and I've been interested in that in a long time. Of course, in coaching, that's a big part of the work we do is people looking for their edges, and edges or blind spots are the opportunities for growth. So we want to get really curious about those. We can work on those things we know that we don't know, but we need help with the blind spots. We either need close friends or peers, or in some cases, a coach to help us move those out into the light so we can start working on
So I'm really kind of curious about that because oftentimes, in my work as an entrepreneurial coach is that people know that they don't know what they don't know, but yet there's often unwillingness to either spend time and or the investment of resources, i.e. money, vulnerability, emotion, into those edges. But the edges are actually where I feel like the real living happens.
it. Completely agree. And it's not easy. You're right. It takes time, it takes energy, resources, vulnerability. You can fail, it can be awkward, and it's just tricky. Like I've met leaders that I'll ask her, how are you at gathering feedback? Oh, I'm really good. Well, give me an example. Oh, at the end of a meeting, I'll say, anybody got some feedback for me? Oh, well, that's not bad, but that's good, but not nearly sufficient, right? If they really want feedback, some people in that room will never give them honest feedback around the table in a room. They'll need to find the right time, the right place, the right language for that person to give them really honest feedback. They'll need to take care of mutual respect, a high trust environment, psychological safety. There's a lot to getting really good feedback, and it can be hard. So you need your personal development to get to a point where you're really good, where your sense of your own self is that you're fine the way you are and you're a work in progress. So that that constructive feedback about your blind spot, you're happy to hear, even if it hurts a little, even if it's uncomfortable, you're basically glad to hear it. And you can say thank you to that person so that you'll get more of that feedback. Not that it's always true or you always have to agree with it, but that process has to remain open, right?
Yeah. Is there a limit to the edges that we can find?
Oh, that my knee jerk reaction is no, but there's probably a limit to how much we can work on at the same time. I mean, growth goes on forever. We can just keep getting better, but we can only do so many things at once. With my coaching clients, there is a tendency, especially for type A people, to want to work on a lot all at once and cover as much as possible during a coaching engagement. And one can set oneself up for failure that way. It's really good to tackle one or two things at a time. At the most three, and it depends on what those things are, how daunting they are.
It's so interesting when I hear you say that because I think that most of those types of leaders resist wanting to focus on blind spots or on edges. And then when they do, they're like, well, what's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. So let's like line them up and let's get them down. And they take a look at this as if this was a corporate project.
Yeah, that's not uncommon.
I think one of the things that when I think about these edges is that these are things that are, um, I think that these are leading indicators of past, current, and future identities. Things that have happened to us that maybe hardened the edge or set the edge, things that are currently doing behaviors, mindsets, activities, etc. And then there's the future vision of like decisions that we've made in the future, even though we may not even be really conscious of it. I think Jeff Benton, one of my guests that had previously been on, said like 95% of all decisions happen subconsciously. So a lot of what we think is actually happening. But a lot of this revolves around this word identities. And and I feel like that there is the coaching that you decide that you voluntarily want to have happen and for you to explore those identities. And then there's the coaching that God, universe, ether basically says, I'm going to coach you on this. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's the coaching we choose and the coaching we get. Yeah, for sure. And, you were just talking about, um, behaviors and habits and identity, and of course, those overlap. But how well we can manage behavioral or habit fluidity has everything to do with how we've navigated our identity. And if our sense of our own identity is, and I'm going to speak about this briefly in a very overly simplified way just for the sake of the conversation here, but if our identity is too rigid and calcified, behavioral change is really hard. If our sense of identity becomes more spacious and open, I think we have an easier time living into the next version. If, let's say, I'm at version 5.0 of my internal software, my goal as a leader is I want to get to 6.0. I want to retain all the features and benefits of 5.0, and I want to have that new version. If my sense of identity is open and loose enough, not too much, but enough, that will facilitate my growing into that next version.
It does. It does. And I like your language, open and spacious. And I think that oftentimes as we age, as wisdom, like often usually the wisdom and coaching that life gives us, not the one that we actually voluntarily explored. I think that in my mind, there's this idea that we get more concrete and that we actually lose that spaciousness. And so that really stood out with what you actually just were talking about, Patrick, is that I think that is that the battle that I mean, I had this aha the other day that we spend our life as children, and whether it's our own construct, our parents' construct they gave us, our schooling construct, our society construct, as we go and we can't wait to become adults. And then there's a certain point that maybe through your 20s, it's the struggle. And then maybe by the 30s into your 40s, you start to realize, okay, I'm finally an adult because now I have all these different things and maybe I have a house, responsibilities, title, resources. And then I feel like we mourn the innocence and the openness of resources, the openness of what you just were talking about. And then we have this chase to get back to that childlike joy and presence. And so it makes a ton of sense. But what do we get wrong? Like, what do we get wrong that, and at what point could someone be able to say, whether they're 20, 30, 40, 60, 80 years old, be able to go, hey, here's actually the left hand, here's the left lane that I can get into the express lane of having openness.
Oh gosh, you just opened four forks in the road for me. Uh, I'm trying to decide. I'm trying to decide which one to go down. Um, Let me first tie one thread to something we were talking about earlier. That spacious piece, it's a little bit akin to when we're growing up. Some people just don't want to travel. They just want to stay around the town they grew up in, which is completely fine. But for some people that yearn for more, especially if they have an interest in leadership, let's say, traveling more across the US to Europe, to other parts of the world, that broadens your frame of reference. And there's a spaciousness in that. And you learn and grow. And that can go to behavioral fluidity because you're forced to take other perspectives that you're not forced to take if you stay in your hometown. So that thread came up around that kind of notion of part of what the direction I was pointing to with the spaciousness idea. So that's one piece. The that notion of that craving for that innocence, that's just such a potentially big topic. And I paused a little bit because I don't know how far down this road we can go, but I definitely want to go partway down it. So there is a corner of the world um, that I'll refer to a couple of different ways. One is integral theory, another way is vertical stage development. And I would really urge any of your listeners that find what I'm about to say interesting at all to dig in, maybe first with a deep dive with ChatGPT or whatever um, AI tool they use, just to get a sense of it. They're not simple to grasp, either of those territories, but I want to go into it a little bit because and I'll start with vertical stage development. I use that in my coaching, and the Telos Institute that I do a lot of my coaching through has that at the center of their offerings. And it was pioneered by a number of people, but one key figure was Robert Keegan, who was at the Harvard Leadership Center until a few years ago when he retired. And prior to probably the 70s, personal development was mostly child development. It wasn't really believed that people could develop their entire lives. Child development just sort of happened, right? Kids went from um, babies to toddlers to on up and developed a capacity to deal with more complexity just by being in their world. And then, of course, going to school. But the belief was that people got to somewhere between 18 and 25, depending on the theory, and you were kind of who you were. You had your capacity, and you were an accountant or a plumber or whatever. Well, Robert Keegan and other gifted researchers found no, this capacity for dealing with complexity and more goes on forever, but you have to work at it. And they studied this rigorously um, and explored ways of continuing to develop it. And the reason I bring this up is there are ruts that we can fall into at these various stages, and there are both healthy and unhealthy expressions of each level of development. And as you move up the levels of development that they map, the healthier levels later on breathe back into it that joy of childhood. So I know that's a woefully inadequate. It's brief and it benefits from that. It's not all that precise, probably outside the scope of a deep dive on this conversation. But it's a really beautiful map of human development. Unlike any map, model, or framework, it's true but partial. It doesn't explain everything, but the territory it covers is quite beautiful. And we found it to be really useful for our clients. Our clients have found it to be tremendously useful across multiple year engagements.
Yeah. And then what was the second one you were talking about?
Well, vertical stage development is one framework within integral theory. The father of integral theory was Ken Wilber, and a deep dive on the work of Ken Wilber will turn up the fundamentals of that. But gosh, I think it was probably the 90s that he did most of his seminal work. He has a bunch of books out. The Integral Vision is a nice primer, introduction to his work. Again, any of the LLMs would be a good place to do a dive. There are others who've added to that work and taken it further and deeper in specific areas. It the vertical stage development is part of the integral theory framework.
Yeah, well, I like the word they use, innocence. And I think that, we find innocence in so many different things. Like you go to a wedding and you find and if you've, at least for me, whenever I go to a wedding, I find the innocence in my own relationship. You go to a funeral, you find the innocence in the fact that we're alive, the birth of another baby. You see another baby. It doesn't have to be a family member. All of a sudden, someone, you find out just had a baby, and you get to see their baby. And it's like you just You find like the innocence in that. And the thing that I keep coming back to is that we all want it. It seems so simple to just be in the innocence, yet it's like so incredibly, seemingly, like we need events to get us back into there. And I'm curious because you and I had talked a little bit about, you and I have both had some um I think the coaching that life gave to us, if you want to say, and and I in our audience definitely knows like my story with Benny, and having to go through that. But when you and I were chatting about it, it for that really resonate with you because um, you didn't necessarily go through that with um, any of your children, but you actually went through some relatively like innocence creating life robbing events.
Well, we lost my wife's middle son to suicide almost 7 years ago. So there was that. I had two near-death experiences, and I may have shared with you, there's a quote by Carl Sagan, and it's something like, I recommend almost dying to everybody. It's character building. You get a much clearer perspective of what's important and what isn't, the preciousness and beauty of life. And the the interviews that some of your recent podcast guests have reported either near-death experiences or traumatic experiences and transformative experiences, and those can result in rites of passage, transformative experiences, um, complete shifts of our identity. They can be profoundly meaningful. And when I look back over my life personally, uh, uh, the hardest times, including those things I mentioned, resulted in fundamental shifts to my sense of myself in ways that were ultimately profoundly positive. Would never have wished for them. I would not have ever chosen them for myself. Just the same as with you and with Benny.
Yeah, that's so well said, Patrick. Even my worst enemy, I would never ever want them to have to make the decision to remove their child's breathing tube. That's just something that a basis of like humanity. It's so gut wrenching and heart wrenching, even to this day. As we come up on his 2-year old birthday on the 12th of December, it uh, it still profoundly impacts me.
I'm sure it does. Uh,
Benny really was my Powerball ticket. I mean, that is the gift that he gave to me, and I know oftentimes people go, I'm really sorry to hear about Benny, and I love that in terms of that they're there with me, but like I don't see it as a thing to say I'm sorry to hear about because it was only 16 days, but like my son lived like in a way that like it's just so hard to explain like being in that room, but he lived more in that 16 days than I had in like 41, 42 years of like living. And so I'm curious for you, Patrick,
Jeannie would say, and I would say too, something very similar to what you just said. There was, of course, a period of profound grieving where it was a black hole. All felt lost. But where we both are, and I'm going to speak to her for now because she raised him and brought him into the world. I only knew him for about 10 years. We were very close and I loved him. We had a great relationship, but I mean, again, she brought him into this world that the depth of their relationship was so incredibly close. Um, she is now at a point, for reasons I'll tell you about in a bit if you'd like to talk more about it. She is at a point where, of course, she still has grief because she loved him deeply, but it's mixed with such gratitude for ever having had him at all. for the gift he was to the world, for the two of us and everyone whose life he touched, and a celebration of his life. And she still has a relationship with him. She talks to him all the time.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that because I talk to Benny all the time. And yeah, that's thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. I'm curious your experience with that in the you know what I liken it to is we have all this like plaque and decay that happens in our life. And whether we actually know it, it's known or unknown. And then you have these moments that literally come in and it's like this blast of like light that like it cauterizes the wound. It like it blows away, sheds light on. I just imagine it's like a UV light that just like it's almost like a spring cleaning. And so I'm curious from you had the front row seat of having like that experience, which is probably very similar to actually my experience. And but then you had your own like near death experiences. And I'm curious when it's your own mortality that's kind of on the line. What does that do to your blind spots and those edges and your sort of your filter?
Um, I will answer that. Can I ask you a question
Yeah,
first?
yeah, please.
Um, why do you think that these really daunting, soul shaking experiences throw some people back on their heels, but then they recover and become stronger, larger, wiser, deeper versions of themselves? And other people are crushed because I know examples of both.
I'll start with the first one. I think that goes to this idea of your mindset maybe potentially you had kind of coming into this of, you know, this idea, does life happen to you or for you? Is I think that when you have things that blow up or punch you in the gut or just really challenge your sort of clarity around what's fair and isn't fair, that I think that there's a crossroads that happens is that you realize that that equation isn't fully complete, is that it's not either to you or for you, is that it's actually a through you moment. And I think that for Benny is that I quickly realized that when it just became apparent that he was really suffering and we knew like this was just like the time, and we pulled his, and it was like time to like we had to remove his breathing tube. Man, like every aspect of like my fiber and being was going that this was I just heartbreak, grief, sadness, like just something that I can't even actually articulate of just like like my cells were crying. And as we're going there and we know it's just like like decision's been made. And the decision had already been made. He was already dying. So it wasn't like, oh, he's healthy and we just made he was already dying. But just knowing when you're making this like what I consider was the ultimate loving decision. Um I thought that like once he died, I was just going to be like on the ground. And what ended up happening, Patrick, was that after he breathed his last, and I have this actually on video because we hadn't had a chance to see his face without any all the stuff on there. So I was taking video because I said, hey, this could take 24 hours. And and there was this moment there where I'm like, Jenna, I think he just smiled. And then he took his last breath and then and then um he he passed away. And um, what followed was something that I haven't fully been able to wrap my head around, but it was this peace that was beyond like any silence. I can't even actually put it. And I had a friend go and he quoted like scripture, like, I will give you a peace, like beyond any peace you've ever like known. And I realized that like that I felt him, I felt Benny, I felt like that peace, that immediate moment was just like I could feel him like wrapping his arms around us, even as we were holding like his like physical form. And after that, I quickly realized that, boy, I'm walking a ridge line. How I've always explained it was that there's this ridge line as you go from mountain peak to mountain peak, which we count like as moments, right? These are the things you see like either on photos or moments or milestones. And this was a peak. And as I was heading to the next peak of, what does this look like afterwards, that I realized that if anyone's ever walked along a ridge top on a mountain, you look down one side, there's a valley, down the other side. And if you stray too far, it can get pretty dangerous. And that's where, for me, I quickly realized that I had either really three options. I could either get lost in the grief and no one would blame me for just falling into deep grief, or getting that was one valley, and the other valley was getting lost in immense amount of like indifference and like burying myself into work and numbing, so to speak. And I just chose the path. For me, it was choosing the path to feel, because feeling was real, and these other were just sort of like drugs, just not called drugs. And so I think that that's the through. And I realized that Benny, I had a friend who sent me a text that said, "Hey, and I didn't understand at the time, but he said, God must really respect you." And I was like, at the time, it wasn't really resonating, but as I got farther along. So I think that, going back to why I think some people get back stronger, is I think their mind in the presence of making it matter. And my big thing that after Benny died was I didn't two things. I think it was I didn't want him to be forgotten. And I realized that his 16 days that he had lived more than me, was that whether it's a responsibility, I felt a call that I needed to show up. I mean, he did in 16 days. How he showed up was like, it was mind-boggling. And so I think the people who on the other side who really struggle, and I'm just curious to get your feedback on this. I think that we as a society do not do a really good job of promoting vulnerability, emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is just like in positivity. It's also about like being willing to bear your heart and soul in a way that is just being where your feet are at. And and I think that's really hard for people. And I think that everyone wants something to blame. And I think that's the big difference. I never blamed anybody. I didn't blame doctors. I didn't blame, Jenna. I didn't blame God. I wasn't angry. It was just a matter of fact of just, it just was. And I think that's maybe the decision, is that, I think that's actually, I just answered. I wasn't angry.
It's profoundly therapeutic approach, profoundly healthy way to get through this, to not blame anyone. Good for everyone involved, most of all you. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's just so beautifully put.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put it back to you. Why do you think?
Um, I I can't improve upon that answer, first of all. And in all honesty, I really don't know. I don't know why. Like when I look back on the times that life has really thrown me back on my heels and I've been able to recover, and like I can't tell you why. I'm not sure. I could give you some reasons. Like I had good parents. I worked hard, but why? Like other people had good parents. Other people worked hard, and I've known people that that was true for, and it just crushed them, and they couldn't get past it. It is sort of a great mystery to me. I don't really. I can't say I understand it.
Yeah, Patrick, I think that everyone has like there's a if I could replay and actually be in the moment with like every single person, I think that Robert Frost's Two Roads Diverge in a Wood, it always pops into my head when it's like these moments and typically these moments that like that suck, that have like a sense of like this is going to be hard, this might be embarrassing, this might actually put me in a sense of like where I'm having to claim my wrongness in it, or judgment, shame, like all those different factors. And I think that we get to these places where there's this two roads diverge in a wood, and like which road are you going to take? It's a much easier road to take, the one that I think most people expect you to take.
That's very true. I would agree with that. Well, to circle back to your earlier question, and it is a nice segue into something else I'm hoping we'll talk about. Uh, the a near-death experience, and even the direction that Carl Sagan quote was pointing. When you almost die, it is a major state change. You are no longer in the same state as you were before. Your world has changed. Your frame of reference has changed. You can't believe you're still alive. And you what you just described wasn't your near-death experience, but that moment right after losing Benny, you were in a different place. You were not in everyday ordinary consciousness. That was a state change. You didn't choose it. You didn't take a drug, or you weren't meditating or chanting, but it came to you in that experience. There are many ways to have state changes. The some of your guests that I listened to were talking about, well, Finney and Kelly breath work. I've taken two of his breathwork classes. He is masterful, and the state changes that I experienced in his breathwork classes were otherworldly, um, profoundly positive, really great. So that's certainly one modality. Meditation is another one. Chanting, some people do ecstatic dance. There are a number of ways of shifting that, but near-death experiences are another one, and they're kind of legendary, right? I mean, there are entire books written about people who nearly died and they come back and they feel like they're a different person. And I don't know of any exceptions to that being in a positive way. They come back feeling like they're a deeper, truer version of themselves. They prioritize better. Um, they spend more time with their loved ones. They don't neglect things they love. If they love to paint and didn't for years, they go back to painting. It's almost always a story like that after a near-death experience. I want to share with you, I'll have to backtrack a little bit on this one. Part of my wife's experience connecting with her son, Aaron, that we lost. So, um, a number of years ago, I found out about an ayahuasca retreat that was run by the relative of a member of the Entrepreneurs Organization here in Cleveland. And a good friend and I were just very curious about it. We'd read a lot about it. This particular retreat had a lot of emphasis on safety. They had medical personnel on staff. They'd been doing it a long time. So I wasn't worried about that. There was some fear about the intensity of the experiences because you have three 6 to 8 hour experiences that start at 7 o'clock in the evening and end whenever they end, usually 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And they're um, acutely psychedelic experiences. The tradition is about 1,000 years old. Indigenous people have used these for healing, for rites of passage, for initiation ceremonies, and so forth. And I actually had read the book How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. If you're familiar with that book, he had a lot to do with what people are calling the psychedelic renaissance, but psychedelics used both for healing, where they can be, when used responsibly, very helpful, but also, in his words, for the betterment of well people. He doesn't think they should be isolated simply for healing, that they can foster personal growth, leadership growth, etc. And this friend and I were just, we are kind of typical entrepreneurs and somewhat risk takers. And so we'd vetted this place and decided to go down. And on the first night, I had an otherworldly mystical experience that shifted my identity in a way I will be grateful for the rest of my life. I can't even begin to put it into words, except to say that in the mystical traditions in every one of the world's religions, they talk about this kind of non-dual merging with everything kind of state. And even if all this was tricking my mind into thinking it was the case, it was the most overwhelmingly immersive, impactful experience of that type I could ever have imagined. And even at that intensity, I felt like I was still trying to look at the Milky Way through a straw. I felt like I was just seeing a teeny part of the magnificence of the beauty of the world that we live in. It was overwhelmingly positive. On night number two, you definitely, in these experiences, you have a sense that there is an intelligence of this plant on the other side. And the conversation can feel as real as the conversation you and I are having. And I was having a conversation with it. I asked it to slow down so I could have something to take back because the night before had been so overwhelming. During that second night, I had a conversation with Aaron, my wife's middle son, that we had lost several years earlier. And it was a very vivid conversation. And he had a message for my wife and for his two brothers. I'm going to hit the pause button on this and go back uh, a month or two. When I told Jeannie I was going to go to this retreat, she basically said, "What the hell are you thinking? You must be out of your mind. You are not in your 20s. What are you doing?" The more I told her about it, she started to get a little bit more comfortable, but she was supportive in as reluctant a way as it's possible to be supportive. So I did call her every night, however briefly, or in the morning, depending on availability. And the next day I called and told her about the conversation with Aaron. 2 days later, she said, "You're not going to believe this. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I want to go on one of these retreats." And I knew that it was because she wanted to have that connection with Aaron. And I didn't ask to have that connection. It just happened. And the indigenous people say, you won't necessarily get what you want, but you will get what you need. That's kind of the conventional wisdom. So fast forward 6 months later, the two of us are at an ayahuasca retreat. Too long a story to go into, though it is really fascinating. On night number three, she had a very long, hour-long conversation with Aaron. And she would tell you, if she were on this call, that she felt she had 10 years of therapy in one evening. And she had been doing for the 3 prior years all the things you do: group therapy, individual therapy, journaling, reading, and it hadn't really put a dent in the depth of her grief. That one experience at that retreat got her all the way from a black hole of grief to a healthy embodiment of her grief. She didn't lose the grief, because you don't, right? but ever since then has been a healthy version of grief. Um, I have over the last, I don't know, probably 5 years been in the company of about 60 people who've experienced the ayahuasca retreat experiences. And not one of them has said anything other than that it was one of the most profound experiences of their life, either healing or personal growth. So, we're at a funny time in this country. They're illegal. You have to go out of the country to do any of this work. And you have to be really careful because there are people who are doing it who aren't qualified. The place we went to is very well qualified and a lot of attention to safety. But I hope over the coming years, and the Michael Pollan book, How to Change Your Mind, is all about this. Um, I hope that things will change. The little tribe of entrepreneurs in Cleveland that have some experience of this would all tell you, without exception, everyone I know, probably 20 that have had this experience or something roughly equivalent, would say, I'm a better spouse, I'm a better father, I'm a better friend, I'm a better leader in my business.
What do you think happens though, Patrick? I mean, like you have like these are the things that you can actually remember, right? These are the things that you actually remember, but there's probably 95% of the stuff that you can't remember. Do you feel like when you do that, you're hitting like a good pause reset button and it's like clearing out all of the plaque or some plaque, like it's like you're going in for like a cleaning at the dentist, right? Jeff Benton told me that like 95% is happening in your subconscious, like the real programming. Or do you feel like your 5% expanded into like, say, like the 10% and all of a sudden it's like you're connecting more with your subconscious? Like, I mean, what do you feel like is really happening? Because I mean, those are some things that like are relatively compelling. Like I'm a better spouse, I'm a better parent, I'm a better friend, I'm a better actually entrepreneur, I'm a better like what do you think is actually happening?
Yeah, that's a bigger question than I can answer. It's over my pay grade, but I'm happy to speculate a bit based on what I've experienced and some of what I've read, and it might be a little bit helpful. Um, I think it goes back to identity. And I think that when we're really rigid in our identity, th- that link between our conscious and subconscious, I just don't think, I think it's really tight and we can't grow as easily. I think when that opens up a little bit, there's more, we become more porous, we become a little more malleable, a little more open and spacious. And so our subconscious and our conscious, we can move in the direction of our aspiration and our dreams a little more easily. There's still limits. There's not a magic wand where we suddenly just instantly become this new version. And it, with any kind of self-improvement work, whether it's the coaching work I do, or whether it's working with psychedelics, it's so important to do preparation work and to be really clear about your intentions. You want to hold the intentions lightly because sometimes things adjacent to your intentions come up, or things that are unrelated that are in your subconscious mind come up, but you still want to do the work. And then whatever comes up in the coaching work or the psychedelic work in the experience, you have to do the integration work. You have to do the integration work. And that's where it starts to pull some of your habits and your behaviors into a new version. And I think your subconscious and your conscious can be manipulated a bit slowly over time, not suddenly like a magic wand, though every once in a while, there's exceptions to the rule. Every once in a while, something crazy happens, right? And I suppose it's like when we're practicing a musical instrument or playing sports. We practice and practice and practice. We hit a plateau, and then all of a sudden, one day, we can suddenly hit that forehand. We don't really know why. So that happens in personal growth too. Um, so that's kind of the best answer I can give. I still agree that our subconscious is there and there's all kinds of stuff there, but I think this loosens it up a bit, these experiences. And there's a reason why all of these folks I know have said, yeah, I don't know how my identity feels different and I'm able to make these changes in areas I've been stuck for a long time. And finally, they've loosened up. I don't think it's the only way. I don't mean to exaggerate. Psychedelics aren't for everyone. They certainly worked wonderfully for my wife, who was dead set against them. Um, but meditation's wonderful. Finney and Kelly, it's the experience I had with him was every bit as intense as the experience with an ayahuasca. It's crazy how effective that is. And there are other modalities as well. So I think that the notion of altered states, however we get them, in service to our personal growth is really useful. I think whatever someone's drawn to, if they aren't interested in ayahuasca or mushrooms or some of the other things that are intense in that way, really look into meditation or really look into Finian and his breath work. There are ways to shift your state and accelerate your learning and growth. And I think that's more important now than it's ever been because of the world we're in. In 2025 and soon 2026, the complexity and pace of change, as we all know, is just overwhelming. And if we can get our sense of identity at a point where we can make the changes we need to make to upgrade our operating system more quickly, more easily, and one, enjoy our life more, be kinder, more loving, be more useful, and embrace the mystery of all of this that you and I are talking about. If we could do all of that better, more easily, more effectively, we'll be better leaders, parents, friends, etc.
So I think about, especially with AI, is that the purpose of AI is to allow us to become more human beings, not human doings. And so is this idea of like getting to these different states, more getting to who you are, who have been, being, and becoming?
Absolutely, it's absolutely all about that, and it's only a temporary piece. You can't stay in these altered states. You have to ground them back in day-to-day life. And the people who get fixed or addicted to the altered states are in trouble. It's not about getting high. You go there for in service to whatever you've decided you really want and need to be to enjoy your life and be of service in the world, to be useful, to make a contribution. And go there to accelerate that, gain some new insights, to be more creative, and then get back to your life and integrate it. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question, first of all?
Yeah. Yeah, you did. It did, and it makes sense. And one of the things you said too was like making your intentions known. So whether you're going to go in a ayahuasca or breathing or do a breathing workshop, or I think just in general, just understanding, um, like how do people understand and get clarity on their intentions?
Well, journaling is a really great way to do that. I tell all my coaching clients journaling is compulsory, and some people say, "Oh, I don't want to do that." And I will often say, "Well, um, people can keep doing the same things over and over again and never really improve. It's the reflecting that helps you improve." And there's a reason that the football teams look at the game films afterwards. They don't have the bandwidth on the field. You have to look back later. So that journaling is a really good piece of it. In some cases, if in the case of people with really good friends, you can even do that in an interview format or with a spouse, kind of dig up in an interview format intentions. Chat GPT or other LLMs can be so useful. Tell it who you want it to be. Like, I want you to be my intentions coach. Um, Start asking me questions. It's just so darned effective at that. I, I do have to share something that I created not long ago, and I've shared this with coaching clients, and most of them really loved it. I created an AI advisory council because I found that I was getting with both Gemini and Chat GPT, I was getting kind of one voice and one point of view out of it. And so I created a council with a systems analyst, a radical skeptic, um, a wildlife guide. I mean, like it's 8 different, very different personalities. And I'll pose a question to the entire council and get preliminary answers back. And out of the entire council, usually there's one or two, sometimes from the unlikeliest people, there'll be one or two answers. And I'll say, oh, I want answers 2 and 4, disregard the rest and then go deeper. That can be really useful.
You had talked about you had this experience. I'm curious. Can we talk a little bit more? I want to dive a little deeper into your near-death experiences because, in a lot of ways, that was like it was a forced chemical change. It was a forced, and all these things we're talking about. I think a change in state is a change in energy. And can you talk a little bit about your near-death experiences, like in detail that you feel comfortable sharing, obviously, but and what happened and who was Patrick before and who was and what do you remember about those and what was the change?
Yeah. So the first one, I was 18, and I'll do a short version of this. I went through a really profoundly dark period. When I look back now, I don't understand why it was as hard for me as it was, but it just was. When you're that age, sometimes things are much harder than we think they should be. But I was suicidal, and I nearly succeeded. And and at the very last possible second was saved from that and had an, a very strong physical sensation associated with that I will never forget. Feeling a physical feeling as if I'd been wearing a 50-pound pack and it was lifted off me. And the cold, hard, rationalist explanation is psychologically, some part of me had already accepted that I could die anytime and lightened up somehow about this. That some part of me had just accepted that was within my control and I could do that. The spiritual side of me, which is the explanation I strongly favor, is that my paternal grandmother is my guardian angel and that she intervened on my behalf. I felt a very strong affinity, have for a very long time for her. And I think something happened that I don't understand. And it created from that point on a different version of me that it's a little hard to understand. It affected my capacity for risk taking, for lack of a better way of expressing it. I felt like I was playing with my winnings. You know, if you go to the casino, you know that phenomenon I'm talking about. I just felt like, okay, everything lightened up, and I got really interested in the meaning of life, philosophy, and psychology, and I read um, voraciously Eastern religion, psychology, I mean, Alan Watts, Ram Dass, Joseph Campbell mythology. I just got really, really interested in why world's religions and why we're alive, what the meaning is, why go on. Not in a morbid way, like just deeply curious. And it had everything to do with kind of who I became. I was building the foundations of what mattered most to me from that point on.
That's the same sort of thing in terms of just this, I feel like decision, that Jen and I were faced with after Benny was sort of like two roads diverge in a wood. left, in your case, left, this is going to happen. To the right, this is not going to happen. What do you feel? Because by the way, we're talking about two big impetuses, but people are listening to us. You're faced with this every single day, being present with your child. How do you actually take a look at like something that is happening in your life, right? Is it happening to you, for you, or through you? Like these were all these like little micro decisions that are happening. But for whatever reason, they don't ever seem to really come into like acute focus until the stakes. And maybe that's what it is. The stakes are just higher.
Yeah, that's true. And I think we wait for that, but we don't have to. We can create practices around that for ourselves. Once we've had that happen to us, we can. So there's one of the things I read in the years after that, all the works of Carlos Castaneda. Are you familiar with him? Uh, he there was some controversy about how much of what he wrote was true, but let's call him an anthropologist, and he studied the Toltec Indians and shamanistic practices. And one of the practices was keeping the idea of death on your left shoulder. As an advisor, you visualize death at your left shoulder. And I've done that on and off ever since. Keeping the idea of your death, that this could be your last day. You don't have to wait for a near-death experience. As an entrepreneur, I I often kept myself grounded from slipping away into the endless to-do list or worrying about the little things by just keeping my death here and posing a question. And it would often make me laugh and just ground me right back into the present moment. We don't have to wait for an actual near-death experience. We can bring death to us as an advisor. I believe that's not the only way. There are other practices in world religions. This just happened to be one I was familiar with by virtue of my reading. There's an app called WeCroak that do you know this? Uh,
I do. I do. I had, I think I had listened to a podcast where the author of, I think, Burn the Boats. It sounds so funny, weird to say it, but how he keeps death front and center because it keeps him grounded. But say more.
Yeah, WeCroak app does that. I mean, it generates quotes and ideas around death just to keep that in your mind, not in a morbid way. And I suppose you need to be at a certain point with your personal work so that you feel that that notion um, is generative and makes you feel more alive, not depressing and de-energizes you. Does that make sense? It's so I don't think everybody that works for.
No. I think at the time when because I had actually downloaded it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I tried it out for a little bit and it didn't really resonate with me. But I do find it interesting that so often people don't want to talk about blind spots, just like they don't want to talk about death. And the other breakthrough that I had after Benny died was that I actually stopped being afraid of dying. It was such a subtle sort of thing that before, when I would think about death, I was like, oh man, kind of scared of it. And I know my parents are going to, die at some point, and if other family members who have died, but for whatever reason, knowing that Benny was there already ahead of me, just I don't know what it was, but it just changed the framework of my excitement to be able to see him again.
Yeah, that's huge. That's just huge. And I don't actually think it matters what the mechanism is, if it's thinking about death, but as you kind of framed it, whatever that plaque is, whatever it is that's required to jolt us out of, let's call it being, relatively speaking, a little more asleep versus being wide awake. right? It doesn't matter what that is. It doesn't matter. Whatever works for somebody, find what works and do that. If it wakes you up, everything in your life, you're going to feel more grateful. You're going to be more alive. You're going to be more useful in your life. Like, find that. You and I have been talking about the things that work for us. Maybe that'll help some people who are listening, but just find what works. That's the trick. The, on the, on an adjacent thread, there is one other story I'd like to share with you. And I can't remember whether we talked about this in our earlier conversation, but when I was in my early 20s, I worked with a good friend for Princess Cruises as a musician. Did I tell you about that?
No, no.
So I did that for a couple of years. It was great fun. We played like 2 shows a night and had full passenger privileges. We couldn't believe we were being paid for it. It was such fun. And at the beginning, it was in the Caribbean and Mexico, and it was, party time and relatively speaking, a young group of passengers. The other entertainers and the officers said, yeah, but you're eventually going to have to do the Alaska cruise. And I grew up in Seattle and I'd been to Alaska a number of times. I said, oh, I love Alaska. And they said, oh, no. The Alaska cruises are a whole different thing. The average age of the passengers is deceased. This was many years ago, many decades ago. And the ships were smaller and people went to see Alaska before they died. I mean, it was a very, very, really, there were about a dozen deaths by natural causes the season I worked on Princess Cruises. It was like a little over a 3-month period. So, so you're on the ship a lot. Like in the Caribbean, you're docked every day in St. Thomas or St. Martin. On the Alaska cruise, you're on the ship more, and the passengers like nothing more than to buy a drink for somebody who had entertained them the night before. And for the most part, they did not make small talk. They wanted to talk about what mattered most. They wanted to impart some wisdom to a young person. And it was like drinking from a fire hose. For 3 solid months, I could have as many of those conversations as I wanted. And I honestly, over 3 months, I had hundreds of them. And the content of the conversations would not surprise you at all. 2/3 of the time, maybe close to that, they were deep regrets and often tears. They had lost touch with their friends. They had blown up their marriage. They had loved music or painting or sports and had let it go. They had realized very late in life that they'd blown it, that they prioritized very badly. The people who were really happy had so many of the similar stories. Like, oh, yeah, I made money, I lost money. Oh, God, what a wild ride it's been. They tended, by and large, to not define success or wealth as money. It was wealth and experience and friends. And it had enormous impact on me. And these were people that were, in most cases at the last 10% of their lives, in many cases, the last 10 months, or in few cases, the last 10 weeks. They were at the end of their lives being very honest, reflecting back on life. So it all kind of underscores what you were referring to earlier. Too many people just avoid blind spots and death and these hard things. And when do they wake up to it? When they find out, oh, I'm not going to be alive that much longer. It's tragic.
It is. And wow, that's an incredible, what a gift that you actually had that.
Enormous gift. It was a crazy gift. I was so incredibly lucky. Yeah. And again, highly impactful, impacted everything after that in an enormous way.
But what a skill that you had, the skill to actually listen to other people, to not only like listen, but to actually hear, because there's a lot of people who can listen, but like, are you actually hearing?
I think the near-death experience went to that because I'd been in the years before that, I'd been reading all this philosophy and psychology um, and so here there was an opportunity to listen to lived experience. Like, I don't know if I would have been tuned into that without having had that experience first.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting choice of words, by the way. I think tuned in. I think we all have like these like AM, FM like receptors. And so often especially if you go through the conventional school system, right? It's about like who got A's, right? Who was either good at sports, who had like clothes, right? That like, like all the things that are external validations. And I think that we get so tuned in, our frequencies get tuned in. And when I'm listening to you talk, I'm listening to those people who are on the Alaskan cruise, that like that last call trip, so to speak. They they had retuned their AM FM receivers to realize it had nothing to do with any of that. And so when I'm Patrick, I'm curious, right? You've coached tons of executives from Fortune 500 companies, and so on. If someone's listening to this today, right? We talked about having near death experiences, having a front row seat to having impactful experiences that have instantly changed those states. We've talked about utilizing, plant medicine to be able to like create those states and creating those like opportunities to alter your state. We talked about Finian with his breath work workshops, which again on our podcast, if you haven't listened to that podcast with him, we actually do a live breathing exercise, which I got to tell you was like, I think it was like 5 minutes of actual breathing. That honestly, it changed your state. How would you succinctly go, hey, if you do these three things, right? We've talked about intention, we've talked about like, how would you articulate that for someone to literally bring this front and center, to retune their piano, to retune their AM FM receiver?
Oh boy. That's so hard to answer because that's almost like saying, hey, for a tennis player, what tip would you give them on their serve? Are they beginner, intermediate, advanced? It's really kind of tricky. Some of the things we've talked about are universal, like, find that preparation and integration in whatever you're doing uh, is always really important. I'm trying to think of anything that's broad enough. You know, this this probably falls more into tips and tricks because the really useful things are more calibrated specifically for a situation and a person where they are. But um, I will sometimes ask a client to tell me what's 180 degrees away from that response that you just told me you make in a meeting, and what might be useful about that. Like to just look at the opposite of something and find out what might be true in it. That can be really surprising. So that can be useful. Sometimes a practice of just doing people will sometimes fixate on trying to do a heroic leap on a behavioral change. And I'll say, what would it look like to be just a 5% better active listener? Just 5%. That's all you have to do is be 5%. I'm out on thin ice with this one. But
Good.
but with some clients during the course of the engagement, we'll talk about three areas: translate, modulate, and feedback. Translate being your job as a leader is to translate. It doesn't work for all leaders, so I can't do this with everybody, but I think their job is to meet their people where they are. So it's their job to meet them. Very often, their people can't go up to meet them. Not always the case, but in a perfect world, they should be the translator. There's a longer conversation around that, but that translation skill is really important. They have to be willing and able to be flexible in the translation. Modulate is being really good at modulating themselves, their energy level, they're leaning in to talk, leaning back to listen, self modulation. A lot of leaders aren't good at that. Feedback, the last one, I just can't tell you how many leaders think they're good at feedback and they're just not. We talked about that a little bit earlier. There are some really good books on feedback out there. It it is an art. Bidirectional, robust feedback. I've sometimes spent 3 to 6 months of an engagement just on getting somebody really, really good at that. It pays enormous dividends.
It's almost like you're asking them for the feedback to actually have a little near-death experience.
Yeah, well put.
Because there's a death of ego, death of pride, death um, of like perception.
Yeah, and all of that ties into the leader's self-awareness and their own identity. How are they able to manage all three of those things? And there's beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels in all of those.
Well, I like that you brought it back to a leadership component because I think often people might, well, I'm not a leader, or I'm not the leader of my organization, or they think of it in terms of a hierarchy. And I think that that is where a big miss happens for so many people. You're a leader to someone, and I will say the number one person you're a leader to is yourself.
Absolutely.
And so I like that you gave that actually framework. I think that that's an excellent framework. One of the things that we talk about identities, right? I want to go the other side of identities because I think that the other important part of identities, the reason why we have identities, is not for you to identify yourself, it's for other people to be able to identify with you, right? Dads with dads, moms with moms, right? Like, and can we talk a little bit about the importance of tribe? I mean, we've talked about like who are you actually, what's your identity and who's it for, right? And what's the intention behind that? But I also think when you talk about these states, state of beings, I think the other thing that is, I think, an unspoken or uncharted or unmined area is your tribe. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know that one of the things as I was being introduced to you was the word tribe and the fact of like how important the tribe, who you are and around. I even hear you talking about your Cleveland entrepreneurial tribe and how impactful that was in creating not just, and I know we're talking about ayahuasca, but I'm guessing that it happened, the state altered state started happening long before you actually decided to go to Mexico or wherever you went. Can you can you talk about the importance of that, of who your tribe is and how that changes your states and your identities?
Oh gosh, I just think your tribe is so important. I think back, um, I've been so fortunate in always having multiple tribes, and my emphasis on that, how much I value that, came directly from my mom and dad, who defined success in large part by the quality of your friendships. And uh, so have always had close friends. I, like you, music was an important part of my life, and I can't even imagine not having the various music tribes I've had. I still have friends I've had, musical friends, gosh, I've had for 40 or 50 years. Really important. And the lessons besides the enormous fun and just those solid brotherly relationships or sisterly in the case of women, uh, the all of the lessons of communication, collaboration, cooperation, and improvisation that went directly to entrepreneurial lessons. I felt I had an unfair advantage in business compared to people in business that didn't have improv in their background. And it was really important. But back to your question about tribe, I don't know what I would have done without that. It was always really important. And the the people I know that don't have them, and I'll mention clients here, it comes up from time to time. Uh, I will strongly recommend they do whatever they need to do to find and gather a tribe. And I don't have to tell you this, you're brilliant at creating your own tribe and here with your guests, and your guests have their tribes, and the benefits to us individually are conspicuous and obvious. But I think the fact that they ripple so beautifully out in the world in ways we'll never know and see is an enormous benefit, deeply satisfying. I just love everything about a resonant tribe, and the Cleveland tribe, I kind of have multiple tribes that kind of have concentric circles. Like the Jason Henkel and two other friends, we have a really tight, really close tribe. But then there's like another circle around that of that's growing closer and closer. Uh, that I love all of them, and they all bring a lot to that tribe. And then I have another tribe that's more that's entrepreneurial. I have another one that's musical. I have another one that's more design related. They're all valuable, and I'm kind of rambling now. What you want to dig in with another question? I'm just affirming your emphasis.
No, but I actually I like it because I think it's important, and I think people go, and I like that you actually put it into the fact that you have multiple tribes, because I think that there are multiple facets that feel like different pantries in your soul. There's a lot of times, especially in this world of technology, where we appear to have a tribe, but what we really is have a network. And there's a big difference between a network and a tribe. So can you actually denote the difference between those two? And if someone's going, I want to create a tribe, what are the ingredients of how do you actually create a tribe?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question, and it's one that deserves some deep pondering. I'm just going to be shooting from the hip on this one. A network feels to me like LinkedIn friends or Facebook friends. It feels useful and shallow. A tribe are friends, people that energize you, that you energize, that you really look forward to seeing. For me, my tribe, the people that I referenced, are all people that I get together with in person. Not exclusively. Sometimes we do a Zoom call or phone calls, but we always make time to get together in person. Although, the moment I mentioned that, I just thought of an exception. I did a facilitator training a few years ago with an organization called 10 Directions. We had a breakout group that resonated so unbelievably well that we decided to keep in touch afterwards. And we got together uh, once a month for about a year, and then once a quarter for several years after that. And I've stayed in touch with several of those people from that tribe and have remained close friends. So I prefer the opportunity to be in person, but I don't think it has to be. I mean, again, I just kind of thought of an exception that tribe was brilliant, and I got so much out of that tribe, and it was virtual only for the most part.
What do you feel that when you look ahead here in the world that we're heading into? We talk about identity, we talk about intentionality, we talk about more beingness, we talk about tribe, we're talking about all the things that we really matter. If we're sitting here 5, 10 years from now, what does this all mean what do you think's available to us?
That is a question I couldn't even hope to answer. Can I'll give it a try, but do you mind if I turn that one back on you? You have had such wonderful answers to the questions I posed. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it first.
I'm more excited about the next couple decades than I have been the last couple decades. And I think that and I truly think that a lot of this has been because of my experiences with Benny, is that it's in the unknown, the potential for discomfort. And I look at all these headlines as just future down payments. And that's actually what I've started looking at life is either headwinds, tailwinds, or sidewinds. And that I do a lot of biking, and so there's a lot of resonance in terms of what life feels like as for my identity as a father, as a spouse, as a friend, as an entrepreneur. Um, in that, what I've come to conclusion is that headwinds are just down payments. We just don't know them yet, and that when I see these headlines that are happening, these are just future down payments on society that we don't know. And we get so tied up in the identity of like who said it, who's in who, like what's your political affiliation, what's your race affiliation, what is like your gender affiliation, that I think we sometimes get lost in the fact is that progress feels like a headwind, and it's not clean. I mean, to for me to get to like where I am today, my experience with Benny was not one that I asked for. And I think that we have all these like mini Benny moments that we maybe not like, and it's painful and that other people suffer as a result of it. But I think that I'm really excited about the next 5, 10 years because of these things that you started to put out here today. I think that more than ever, um, as we tap into more of our beingness and less into like rote memorization, transactional versus transformational. I just think that there are so many things that we have not created because we've just been so stuck in automaticity.
Agreed.
I don't know. How does that answer land to you?
Beautiful. Love that. Really hope you're right. It's a crazy time. It's kind of thrilling and terrifying, I think. It feels to me like the world's getting much better and worse at the same time, depending on which direction you look. Um, the there's a there's a book by Margaret Wheatley called "Who Do We Choose to Be?" And she was a management consultant for a very long time. And wrote some gorgeous books. She really believed that you could go into organizations and change them from the inside. And she explains early on in this book, she kind of gave up. She thinks we're looking at some version of collapse. It might be a soft collapse or a hard collapse, and that something new will be rebuilt in the wake of that. That ultimately where we're at isn't sustainable. And I don't know that I agree with all of her conclusions. She holds them lightly, even the time frame for it. But I love her perspective. She basically zooms way out and says, the civilizations rise and fall, that uh, the world always needs good people. And the name she gives to good people is spiritual warriors, and not warriors like with swords and guns, like people who are ready to rise up, and whether times are prosperous or whether they're difficult, people whose values are really good, who care about taking care of themselves, their families, their community, and the world, and are just going to do the right thing. And if they have a lot, they'll do the right thing with a lot. And if they have a little, they'll do the right thing with a little. And it's a quite beautiful book. And I read that book and thought, it'll all be okay. It might be harder than we think, or it might be easier than we think, but it'll be okay. And I know an awful lot of people that are willing to just keep moving forward and do the right thing, whatever comes. And it might exceed all our expectations on the upside. I hope it does. It might be harder than that. And I know a lot of people who are going to rise to the occasion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I think well said. Well said. And by the way, how beautiful is that book, the theme? Sometimes you have to have death for new life. You have to have death of identity. You have to have death of a past, a death of a narrative, death of like a vision. And so that it creates space for something else.
It's happened many times before. Could easily happen again. Wouldn't be the first time, would it?
No, it wouldn't. Patrick, I think that's a great way for us to kind of tie this up. What a man, I got to tell you, that was the fastest 90-minute conversation. But Patrick, if people want to know more about you, or they want to follow you, or they are like, man, I'd like to get this guy into like as a coach, or find out more about some of his thoughts, where can they find you?
Website northish.com. Best email address professionally is patrick@northish.com. They can reach out to me there.
Yeah, and we'll put the link in the description, in the show notes. Do you do any social media?
Instagram a little bit, LinkedIn a little bit. I mean, I'm on both. I'm not terribly active.
I take from our conversation, you're not looking for network, you're looking for tribe.
That's very much where I am these days. Yeah.
Which I love. Well, Patrick, you've listened to some of my other podcasts, and as you know, I like to leave the audience with a ripple, a call to action, a question, a thought, a ripple. What would you have our audience leave with?
There's a question I really love. What does this situation need? It invites us to even include ourselves. It kind of invites us to float into the balcony. If we're at work, it allows us to look down on the table. We're a stakeholder. Everyone else is at the stakeholder. Think about us, employees, customers, the company, the industry, and just think about the situation as large as we can hold it, and think about what it needs. Not excluding ourselves is not a martyr move. It's like everyone who's touched by this, what does it need? And what might I do? And sometimes the answer is nothing. That's what the situation needs. But it can be a quite beautiful question.
I love that. The brain looks for answers, and I love it. Patrick, what a joy. What a joy to have you on. I know it's when you and I had talked, it's been a little bit distance from when we talked till now. I got to say, it did not disappoint. Thank you so much for being here.
It was such a pleasure. I loved it. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.